Pallatrax. I'm here with Tim Hodges, angling addict. Yeah, addict. Yeah. Here at Spring Pools in Warwickshire. We've come for a little session on the bank, and Tim's kindly let me ask him a few questions. So we're going to fire away. I think we'll start off with Tim. How did it all begin?
Well, when I was 5 years old, my parents moved to Northern Ireland, and I'd never fished before that, but my granddad came to visit, who was an avid angler, and took me fishing for the very first time on the River Bann in the tidal stretch near a town called Coleraine. And I'd never fished, so I didn't know anything. And I remember we were fishing with just earthworms, probably brandlings out of the manure pile.
Yeah.
And we caught quite a few just tiny little flounders. I was 5, so, there might have been monsters, but I don't think they were. And I don't know why, but I just loved every second of it. You can't really explain to non-anglers why you like angling, but at that moment, I wanted to go fishing more. But unfortunately, my granddad came to visit us twice a year. So from that day on, I had to try and persuade my parents, who were both academics and not really into fishing, to occasionally take me out, because my granddad gave me a little bit of fishing tackle. Looking back, it was shocking stuff.
Yeah. So what was your tackle like back then?
Well, it was cane rods.
Yeah.
I mean, my granddad actually presented me, I think it was on my 7th birthday, he presented me with this box which had a combination rod in it. It's made from cane, what they call split cane or built cane, so hexagonal type rod. But this combination rod, you could turn it into a boat rod, a float rod, a spinning rod, so you can imagine it was not exactly and it had a sort of centre pin reel that you could turn sideways to cast. And there was a few hooks and bits and pieces. And I started fishing in the local harbour, catching flatfish, and off the local rocks for wrasse.
Yeah.
Usually limpets, because I only have my pocket money. Occasionally I'd save my pocket money up so I could buy a few ragworm and catch the plovers. But otherwise it was prizing limpets off the rocks. But just every opportunity I had, went fishing, and loved every second of it. And then when I was about 9, we moved from the coast, because I lived right on the coast, and we moved inland a bit, and the only fishing I had then was on a trout stream. And honestly, I knew nothing about fishing, but tried to read a few bits, and my granddad taught me a few bits, and on the trout stream I went from fishing with quite bulky fishing tackle in the sea to having to be a little bit more finesse, but again using worms just dug up. And I can remember catching my first little trout. It was probably a brown trout.
Yeah.
Probably didn't have rainbows in these wild little streams, not stocked. And I was over the moon with that. And it was probably, again, probably 6 inches long. And again, just doing it as every opportunity I could, just walk down to where the stream was. I know I didn't catch much, but I just loved it. And then at 10 we moved back to the UK, and here was this little kid who wanted to go fishing. I now had a bike, which meant I could cycle to a place called Crystal Palace Park Boating Pond.
Yeah, yeah.
And I didn't have a clue, so I was using hooks that were far too big, line that was far too thick.
Did you know what was in there?
No, not really.
No, just
but
going
I
on.
Just knew you
it
could
was
go
a bit of water.
there.
Yeah.
And I wasn't catching anything. I was using bread and worms. Well, mostly bread. And I met this kid there who was like a little southeast London Herbert, who told me that I had to use maggots. And I thought he said magnets. And I was thinking, what's he on about, this kid? Because I was like a little Irish kid, because I'd picked an Irish accent.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand it. And I remember asking my granddad, what is this maggot maggots. And he said, no, it's maggots. And again, even though when we came back to UK, I still only saw my granddad occasionally. And unfortunately, he died when I was 11, so I didn't get a chance to really spend lots of time with him, which was a shame, because when he died, he left me all his fishing tackle, and I had a bit more then. But I started watching what other people were doing and realised I needed to buy smaller hooks, smaller floats, and just had to learn. I had no one teaching me, so I had to buy things like the Angling Times, the Angler's Mail. I got myself a paper round and buy whatever fishing magazines I could, and I gradually started to learn that to catch these fish in this boating pond, you had to really finesse everything.
Yeah.
And again, you know, if you caught half a dozen perch or roach in a day, it was a good day.
Yeah.
And then I started school, went to grammar school, and I met a lad there who was into fishing. And one day we read this thing in, I think it was Angling Times, about this lake in Kent. I lived in South East London, called Horton Kirby, and there was a guy who did a feature there, and it was a match-based feature, and they were catching lots of roach. And my mate said, oh, we've got to go there. And for us, this was epic, because I used to have to walk quite away from my house to the station, get on a train, go a couple of stops, change trains to meet my mate at another station, to then get another train, change again to get to this place called Farningham Road, and then walk for ages. Looking back, it seems like it was forever, but it was probably 20 minutes or so. And then we turn up at this lake, and whereas we'd been catching half a dozen roach, we sat there float fishing, and we were catching one fish after another one, and it was like, this is fantastic.
Different ball game.
Yeah, and it's like, this is worth all the money it was costing us to get on the train.
So how much would you say it cost you to get there?
Looking back now, I don't know. And I know we used to try and avoid paying for a ticket if we could.
Of course, yeah.
You know, we'd climb over fences to get onto the station platform. I mean, I know you shouldn't encourage this sort of behaviour, but at the time we'd do anything to go fishing. But I don't know. All I know is I had to have a paper round and pay for whatever I could.
That had to be your weekend jaunt.
Because my parents, they were both academics, and they weren't interested in any type of hobby or sport. You know, as far as my dad was concerned, if it wasn't to do with academia, then I shouldn't be doing it. But we did that for a couple of years, but I kept seeing these guys sitting there with two fishing rods.
Yeah.
And it seemed like they were never doing anything. Just sitting. A
bit like us now.
Yeah. And I started thinking, what are they doing? And then I started to read about Richard Walker and Jack Hilton fishing at Red Mile Pool. Well, they're fishing for carp. But we never ever saw one do anything or catch anything until one day, I think I was about 14, it was quite early in the season, and I suddenly see one of these guys leap up, strike, rod's bent over.
Yeah.
And of course, as a young kid, you go, oh, what's he got?
Yeah.
So we walked up to where he was playing this fish, and he landed a common, thinking back, it's probably mid-double, and it was a monster.
To you, it was a big fish.
You know, and I remember sitting pestering this guy. Just, what are you doing, mister? What are you doing? What bait are you using? What hooks are you using? What line are you using? And he must have, I wish this kid had gone away. But I just wanted to know, and I said to my mate, I said, we've got to do this. I want to catch one of those. Because it was a monster.
Yeah.
And I went home, got no money. Well, how am I going to get a carp rod? Freeman's catalogue.
Yeah.
Freeman's catalogue. They had some fishing kit in there, and it was poor. It wasn't like good fishing kit, but they had some in there. And there was a rod called an Edgar Seeley Carp Master, fiberglass.
Yeah.
And I managed to persuade my mum that she should get this for me, and I would pay her back weekly, because that's the Freeman's
Yeah.
and promised that I would, course I probably didn't pay about everything, and I managed to get myself, it was a Edgar Seeley Intrepid reel, I think it was, all I know is Intrepid reel, horrible thing again, put some line on it, and we started. He managed to get some stuff by hook or by crook, I don't know, my mate, he probably robbed it from somewhere, but because he was a bit of a nerd, but we started going fishing for carp, but we didn't have a clue, not a Scooby-Doo what we were doing. But I started to read more and more, and you started thinking, oh, I've got to get some bread flake or some luncheon meat or sweet corn. But we never put any bait in, we just put a bit of luncheon meat and cast it out, middle of nowhere. There was none of that sort of looking for spots or anything.
No.
Just chuck it out.
Yeah.
And we never used to catch anything. But we'd sit there with a float rod and our carp rod sitting there. No bite allowance.
Just keeping an eye,
And occasionally you'd catch a bream, which was a bonus because it was bigger than the roach or perch that we were catching. And very occasionally a tench, which was a real bonus. But then we decided, well, we must, obviously to catch a carp you must night fish. So we then thought, well, we need stuff to night fish. Again, begged, borrowed, stole, and ended up with like an umbrella with polythene wrapped and hooked on the sides, and a sun lounger.
And you're sharing this umbrella with your mates.
Yeah, and it's only a 45-inch one. It wasn't like a proper one, so your feet were always hanging out the ends. If it rained, you just got wet. A sun lounger out of Argos, which was $9.99, and a sleeping bag, which is probably no thicker than a tea bag.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, we had nothing really. Still just one rod.
Between you?
No,
you
one rod.
You had one rod each,
And started fishing at night for carp, and then during the day we'd actually fish for the other things.
Yeah.
But you'd always have this rod out, and nothing was ever happening. And then one day it got to quite late in the year, and it started getting cold. And it had got through to November, and we'd fished right through from June the 16th and caught any carp, but we were always there.
Yeah.
Every weekend, fishing Friday night, Saturday night, straight from school, on the train, down there Friday night. And this was at a place called Dartford Lakes, Brooklands. And it was obsessive. And then we decided that we were going to do this all winter. But my parents suddenly announced in November, you can't go, it's too cold. And I'm like, it's only cold, I'm not going to die. No, it's too cold, you can't go. Now, being quite rebellious, I thought, well, I'm going. But I couldn't get away with going Friday night because it was obvious I was going to go fishing, so I said to my mate, look, if you're going down there, I'm not going to be able to come till Saturday. I said, but I'll stay Saturday night. He said, well, even though your parents didn't, I said, I'm definitely staying. And I literally told them that I was just going for the day, buggered off. And at 6 o'clock that evening, I walked up to the telephone box, no mobiles obviously, put my money in. Mum answered the phone. I said, Mum, it's Tim. She said, what do you want? I said, I'm not coming home. Bye, bosh. Just put the phone down. And I heard a lot, but I walked back to the lake thinking, oh, I'm going to be in so much trouble when I get home. But sod that, face the consequences later. And as luck would have it, I caught my first carp that night.
Yeah.
Now, we had, again, clueless, but we'd heard that a match angler had caught some carp on maggots in a match like a couple of weeks previous. And we decided that we'd give it a go. Now, looking back, you think, oh, if only I'd known something of what I know now.
Yeah.
But I literally just got like a size 10 hook, crowded 4 or 5 maggots on it, and just chucked it out.
Yeah.
So there was no bait going in, just a bunch of maggots, cast probably 30 or 40 yards out into the lake. And sometime that evening, all of a sudden the bobbin slammed up to the top of the rod. And this is when you're using a very liquid bobbin.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm attached to a carp.
Yeah.
And I play this thing in.
So take us back to that feeling. That bobbins hit the rod.
Well, mostly it was shock, because instead of like a bream or,
it's dropped back and
but this thing's just, the bobbin's just slammed into the top. I've grabbed the rod and I remember I was shaking. Yeah. And my mate was going, don't lose it, pull it, don't lose it, give it some line now. And we were just panicking. Yeah. But it didn't, as I say, we didn't have a clue. And eventually I get this fish into the edge and we managed to crowd it into this net that we'd bought, which wasn't very big. And we both stood there like looking at it and managed to find someone else who was fishing who weighed it for us. Scales. That would have been a real luxury. Yeah. And it was £17.
Wow.
And
your first carp,
17 pound mirror carp. And I can't describe the feeling. I think we stayed up all night. Yeah. Any sleep because we were buzzing.
Absolute buzzing, yeah.
And I went home to a whole world of hate, but I didn't care. Yeah. This is it for me now. My life had changed. Yeah. And at that point, I think my parents genuinely had given up trying to control me, and they just, well, if you're going to do it, then you ought to try and be sensible. It's cold, and I think my mum allowed me to buy us better sleeping bag through the catalogue again, whatever. And we started all winter. We went fishing, and believe it or not, that winter we actually caught not loads. It was probably 2 or 3 carp.
But in your terms, at that stage, it was a lot of fish.
Yeah, and on maggots. Again, no swim feeder, just a bunch of maggots. Chucked out, no feature finding involved, just potluck. Chuck them out there, and you think, well, we had enough carp that winter to make you think, if only we'd known to fish with ground bait or with some maggots in a swim feeder, which you could have bought, but I didn't know about. But it gave me what I call the thirst for knowledge. I wanted to find out more. So I read everything I could read about fishing. And in those days there was no dedicated carp magazine. So you'd buy a magazine, I think it was Course Fisherman, Course Angler, obviously Angling Times and Angler's Mail. And they'd have one article about carp fishing. So it wasn't like there was lots of articles. There'd be, most of them were about tench, roach, bream, and one article about carp. So I just bought everything.
Not even a full page feature either, I guess.
But no, just little bits and pieces. But started to glean this information, and then started meeting other people who were carp fishing. And I suppose now I look back, I was the pest who would question people. So what are you doing? Why are you doing this? What can I do? And then I can't even remember buying the second carp rod, but I must have bought another one. But then I had a stroke of fortune. I used to use a shop in Lewisham, South East London, called Rod and Line. It doesn't exist anymore. It's run by a guy called Geoffrey Bucknell, who was a very famous fly angler. But he had this shop, and they used to build their own rods in the shop. Quite a wide range of rods. Yeah. And I managed to get myself a Saturday job in this shop. And I managed to persuade them to let me build 2 of my own carp rods.
Wow.
And they let me have them really cheap because I built my cork handles turned on the lathe, they were all glued separately on and whipped the rings on, because the guy who was working there showed me how to do it. Yeah. And I built these 2 carp rods. Now we're talking carp rods back then, £1.75 pounds. Yeah. It was a heavy carp.
Wow, yeah.
And they were floppy. It was an understatement. You couldn't cast far. 70, 80 yards was a long way. Yeah, yeah. And I also managed through the catalogue, I do remember this, buy myself 2 Mitchell 300 reels, which back then were like quite a sophisticated reel. And they're still, these old Mitchell 300 are still good reels in reality, but nothing compared to the modern Shimano's. And started to get even more serious about this carp fishing. Now, I suppose looking back, got to bait-wise, we were using very simple baits, but I started to read about specials.
Right, okay.
That people like Jerry Savage were using, Jim Givington, and they were made from various cat foods or dog foods mixed with cereal and different things. And although there was some information, you never really knew. So, we just got to get a tin of cat food, so Weetabix or something, make a paste.
Very secret squirrel.
Yeah, there was a lot of secrecy. And so you just experimented, you bought different, kitty cat or different brands and dog food, and it was fine. Mixing it all into a paste. And then, but back then we were burying the hook inside the paste. And you used to get bites, and you just strike into thin air. And most of the time you were just pulling the bait straight out of the fish's mouth. Because to keep it on, you'd mix it up a bit too stiff. Or you'd put something round the bend of the hook like a piece of crust and then mould the, but you was basically pulling it out of their mouth. And then if you left it out there for too long, the little fish would peck away at it, and you wind and you got nothing. And it's just like impossible. And then people started using luncheon meat, which was a lot more user friendly. But still hiding the hook. We were convinced that you had to hide
to bury it almost,
Fish couldn't see it. And you couldn't, again, cast it very far because it would come off, and you always probably couldn't catapult it out very far. But good bait. Still is a good bait. Still catch carp on it regularly. People have forgotten about luncheon meat, but the fish haven't stopped eating. And sweet corn, obviously, bread. But these pastes started becoming more and more prevalent, and in the articles people talk about these specials. Special baits. And all of a sudden, we then started hearing about a real innovation, which was I started fishing this lake. So it was the early 70s. And there was a couple of guys on there who used to catch a lot of fish, but they were older than us. We were sort of like teenagers, 15, 16, and they were grown-ups, mid-20s. Wouldn't ever tell you anything, wouldn't even talk to you. And you'd see them catching fish. And then we started to notice that every now and again you'd walk past them, and that if they hadn't hidden it, you suddenly started seeing these round balls. 25, 30 mil. But if ever you try to stop, they'd cover them up. You start thinking, what are that? And all of a sudden we started reading about there was this thing called a boiling. And gradually, I was lucky enough, the shop that I used, there's a guy who used to come in there called Bob Morris. Now Bob Morris became a real big name in carp fishing, and he was friends with Fred Wilton, who invented the boiler. And he started talking to me in the shop. Now, one of my favourite ways of fishing back then was what we called anchored crust, where you'd literally put your lead on the line, a shirt button, and then a hook, and you'd put a great big bit of crust off an uncut load, and you cast it out and then let the crust come up to the surface, so you don't your bail on, the crust will come up.
You're almost zig fishing.
Well, it was zig fishing, but whereas instead of having a long hook link, you literally just opened your bail arm.
You're just letting the whole line come on.
And it come up to the surface, and you'd put a bobbin on, and when the crust fell off with little fish pecked it, your bobbin would fall down. But we caught quite a few carp doing it. And one day I was fishing at Dartford Lakes, and Bob Morris walked past just as I caught one. And it meant that he took me a little bit more seriously.
Yeah.
He started telling me a few things. And I suddenly found out what these boilies were all about. And it was basically a special paste, but made instead of water, mixed with egg, and then boiled. But again, we were still putting the hook inside the paste, the ball of paste. But when I say boil, 20 seconds. You literally just put a skin on the outside. And you wanted the inside side, because you had to hook.
You were, so at this stage, you were literally hooking the boilie.
Yeah, but you hid the hook, so it wasn't like a side hook. It was
literally almost you putting it in.
Yeah. So you used to cut your hook off, thread the line through, tie your hook on, and then pull it right back inside. Pre-lining wherever possible. If you used a lead, it was half an ounce. It was three-quarters of an ounce was a monster lead. And again, you used to miss bites all the time. And I remember one particular session, I'd turned up and I'd made some baits out of Marmite. It was a flavour. And a mate of mine was fishing, and he said, "Oh, I've been using this new bait I made, and it was a strawberry flavoured concoction." He said, I've missed 4 bites this weekend." I thought, bloody hell. He said, "But I think they're a bit hard." And he said, "Yeah, I have some." He said, "I'm going home." And he gave me a handful of these baits, and he'd boiled them for a little bit too long.
Bullets.
Well, they weren't rock hard, but they were just too hard. But I remember putting my bait on 2 rods, and then the 3rd rod, which at the time was the stroke rod, you only put it out in the dark, and the bailiffs were on. I thought, I'll try his bait. And that night I had 3 or 4 bites on these new boilies, and missed every single one. And when you look back, you think, why didn't I just tie it on? I could have done a hair rip, but you had to hide the hook. So I was still hiding the hook, and all I was doing is the fish were picking it up, I was just pulling it straight out of the net. And you look back and you think, oh, how stupid was that? But we didn't know any better.
No.
More and more people started getting into it, and little companies built up. Now, I suppose again, I was about 20 years old-ish. I met a young kid at Dartford Lakes who was like me, but he was about 14, this kid. And he was like me when I was 14. I wanted to know what people were doing. And he saw me catch a couple 3 carp. And he came up and went, "Oh, what bait are you using, mister?"
So he became you, he was your pest.
And he was a bit of a pest. Topped up, it was Martin Lock.
Lucky,
right? And he used to see me down the lake and he'd come up and go, "Oh, what bait are you using, mister?" And I quickly sussed out that he was going to be a good angler, because he asked all the right questions and started catching a few fish, because I gave him the secrets that I'd been given. And of course he ended up like being a superstar and inventing solar tackle. Now I remember when he got his first job when he left school was at an engineering company. But that engineering company went bust, and he had the brains to buy a lathe off the engineering company, so that because he used to make rod rests for us and himself while he was at work. Right, so there's only a handful of people getting these stainless steel Banksides, which when you were fishing in the Down Valley, the banks were very gravelly, and you only had aluminium banks, they were always bending. And these were stainless, they were bulletproof. And he had the sense to buy this and put it in his garage and start making them and selling them. And of course, being the innovative kid he was, he did have some brains, started sort of like making nice bobbins and then he got into bait and bought out his own mixes, Savay seed mixes, when he started fishing at Savay, which were great baits. Caught so many fish on some of them. He had a mix called Quench, or a flavour called Quench, which was outstanding. And so I met him, and at that time in the Down Valley, it was really the place to go carp fishing. There was a lot of lakes with carp in, and a lot of big names and faces fished there. Lee Jackson, just people who who've become sort of household names for us older
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
I mean, obviously the newer generation perhaps wouldn't know some of these people, but they were fishing there, and we were all fishing together. And that whole Darrant Valley had some really good fishing.
Yeah.
Not monsters by today's standards. I mean, a 20 pounder was still a monster.
It was a big back then, wasn't it?
Occasionally a 30 pounder.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, Hutchie and Andy Little and people like that started writing about this lake in the Colne Valley called Sabba, where they were catching these 30 pounders regularly. So of course we all went, well, we've got some of this. But
So they've read about stuff, and you've gone, right, we need a piece of this, how do we get on?
yeah, and that was the difficult thing, trying to find out how to get membership.
Yeah.
Because again, you had to try and find out, and then in some cases there was a very famous carp lake out in the Colne Valley called the Combs, where you had to go for an interview.
That was you hear about certain anglers that had to go for the interview at the pub in London.
Yeah, there's all sorts of places like that. The one where you had to go for an interview at fisheries.
Yeah, yeah.
There was this like little inner circle, people fishing in the Colne Valley, and it was all the real big names, Hutchie, as I say, Maddox, and Richie McDonald, and, Andy Little at the time, who was a real big name. And they're fishing these lakes where they were big lakes, 70 acres.
Yeah.
A monster compared to most lakes. And not easy fishing, but they're catching big carp there. And it used to be in the Angling Times, another big Savay carp. And of course, we had all read about Redmar, but Redmar was unobtainable for most people.
Yeah.
You couldn't fish it. It was secret. No one knew even where it was most of the time. It was for years before anyone actually found out. So although we knew that the record fish had come out there, unless you knew the right people, you weren't going to get to fish it. And
even now, it's hard to get on, isn't it?
well, yeah, but you can now book it, and it's different. And it has lost its sort of. The moment they opened it up, it did lose a little bit of its sort of.
It's magic.
Yeah, it's magic to a certain degree. And I was lucky enough to fish it with Martin Locke, and managed to catch a small Redmar carp, like a little common. And to me, that was just magic.
Yeah.
Because when you're there, you've got to have a picture on the day.
Oh God, yeah.
It was a magical place. But all of a sudden there were far better places to go. So although that was what I call history, there was now these big pits that were producing these monster carp.
Yeah.
And
we're talking now. We're into the 80s.
Yeah. The late 70s, early 80s.
And they're chucking out what, 30s?
30 pound.
Wow.
I mean, a 40 was a real monster.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
Occasionally someone would hear about 40 pound carp. But in the very early 80s, probably 1980, there was quite a famous lake in Norfolk called Waveney Valley, which was a series of lakes where you could go and stay in a caravan or you could bivvy up. And it had, I think on the whole complex, probably there was about 7 or 8 lakes, but there was like 4 30-pound carp. And people like Tim Paisley went and fished there. Everyone went and fished there to try and catch a 30-pound. And a mate of mine rang up from Manchester and said, I've met this guy who's really good at carp fishing, and we're going down to, it was November, he said, we're going down to Waveney Valley for a weekend. He said, you'll like this bloke. Right nice bloke. He said, why don't you meet me down there? And it was quite a drive, Waveney.
Yeah.
But there was these 30-pound carp in there, and my mate lived in Manchester, so I thought, yeah, it'd be nice to see him. His mate turned out to be Frank Warwick. Real big name.
Yeah.
Or became a really big name. Good angler, good thinking angler. And I met Frank on the bank there, and we immediately had a thing in common. We liked talking about bait and rigs. And luckily enough for me, that weekend I caught my first 30-pound carp. A story for another time, the actual event catching.
Yeah, of course,
I caught my first 30-pound carp in front of Frank Warwick. So he took me seriously as a carp angler, And we became, even though he lived in Manchester and I lived in Kent, you know, it was a long way away from each other, we used to phone each other all the time talking about bait and rigs and bits and pieces. He was fishing a place called Reedsmere. And I remember one day he rang me up. He said, I'm thinking of joining Harefield in the Colne Valley. And I said, are you mental? He said, why? I said, listen, I know, as much as I know about Harefield, it is proper head-banging numbness to fish there. It's like, you know, you do well to catch one. I said, but it's covered in mussels. I said, there's bars. I said, it's a working gravel pit. There's lots of things against you. And he said, yeah, but there's 5 known 30s in there. And that was a big deal, 1985 30s.
Yeah.
But there was only, in those early days, known to be about 30 carp in 70 acres.
Wow.
So it was rock. And I wasn't really sure that I fancied it.
Yeah.
Even though I'd heard about Harefield with these big carp and Save with these big carp, I knew that most people went on there and they were lucky to catch one.
Yeah.
But they were there. And I said, oh, Frank, I don't know if that's for me. And he said, come on, Tim, he said, it's only 40 quid for the season.
Wow.
And it was only 40 quid because no one wanted to fish on there. It was too difficult.
Yeah.
And he said, for 40 quid, if you just do a couple of weekends, because I was earning good money, I worked in advertising, I was earning good. So I thought, sod it, give it a go. So it was in the old days when we had the closed season. And we met up, first day of the season, June the 16th, at Harefield. And at the start of the season, you'd find out there was always a few keenies join it, thinking, oh, well, it can't be that difficult. They never used to last long. But that first weekend, I'm on Harefield, rock hard, 30 carp, 70 acres, difficult to land fish because of all the zebra mussels that cut your line. And I hooked and lost 2 that very first weekend, and I thought, it's not that difficult.
Yeah.
I hooked 2. Yeah, I didn't land them, but I thought, well, it's only a matter of time. If I can get 2 bites every weekend, I'm going to land one eventually. Well, I fished every weekend from June the 16th, plus probably had 2 or 3 weeks where I had holidays and
sneaked them in,
all week. A few overnighters, and I put my first fish on the bank in September.
Wow. Yeah.
And I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved every second of the challenge. And I didn't think I would, but it sort of became an obsession that I had to defeat this ball break.
Because you were defeating the actual lake itself.
Yeah.
You weren't. The fish were there for the taking. They'd probably never seen a hook.
To be honest, the fish weren't that difficult to get a bite from if you could find them.
Yeah.
Because quite often you couldn't find them.
Yeah.
You were miles away.
Miles away, yeah.
And it was a big lake, quite a long way across, so sometimes they were right out in the middle. You couldn't even reach them.
Yeah.
But if you could get on them, you could get bites. Landing them was a completely different ballgame because the zebras on there were like razor blades. And one of the first things I learned when I was on there, that the gear I had was totally inadequate.
Yeah.
My rods were too soft, my reels weren't big enough. So all of a sudden I then had to invest in new rods, new reels, just upgrade everything, so cast firm. And my wife, bless her, she knew I wanted some new rods. So she phoned my mate, Bernie Stamp, who now owns Liquid, because we used to work together, and said, look, I know Tim wants some new rods, what ones do you want? He said, oh, I know exactly what he wants. He wants Bruce Ashby Horizons. He said, I'll organise it, you've just got to pay for it. And April, it was my birthday, and she said, oh, I've got a surprise for you for your birthday. I said, oh, yeah, so on the day of my birthday, she was wondering what the surprise was going to be. And I came home from work in the evening, and she said, I've got a real big surprise for you.
She's built this up, hasn't she?
Oh yeah, she proper liked it. And when I got round there that evening, her sister was there. Now, her sister was quite fitty. And they were going, we've got a real big surprise for you. And I suddenly thought, am I going to get one of my dreams come true here? Naively thinking that there is possibly half a chance that this might happen. And then to make matters even worse, they said, after dinner, so have dinner and everything, they kept saying, oh, you're going to really enjoy this. And I'm thinking, yeah, I am. Her sister was real fit. And they said, right, you've finished dinner, and they said, right, it's in the bedroom.
Oh, my word!
This is going to happen.
Yeah.
This is going to happen. And I go in the bedroom, and on the bed is 2 Bruce Ashby Horizons. Now, I'd like to say I was disappointed.
So let's take this back a little bit. Back then, the Bruce Ashbys were the bee's knees.
He was a rod builder. I mean, God bless him, he's dead now. But he used to build like these custom built rods, which were. And if you said to him, look, I want a long range carp rod, he knew exactly what he wanted. Yeah. So he was designing rods and building them, all hand built. You know, get your name put on them and all that. Yeah. And so you were getting a proper fishing.
Yeah.
Still not heavy test curves.
No.
But these were fast takes.
Yeah.
Probably 2.5 pound test curve. So we're not compared to today's modern.
Yeah.
But
so you're walking in the bedroom, you see these 2 rods on the. What's your feeling?
Well,
disappointment.
I'd like to say I was disappointed that the sexual aspect of this had disappeared, but the truth is I was happy at the fact there was 2 Bruce Ashbys.
Yeah.
But I also was disappointed.
Go on.
Why wasn't there 3?
Oh.
And I said to her, these are fantastic. And I was lovingly caressing them. And I'm not talking about her and her sister. Yes. I'm talking about the rod. And she said, what's that? I said, why did you only get me 2?
Oh no.
She said, well, Bernie organised it and he never said you wanted 3. And I said, well, what a moron he is. He knows I want 3. So the next day I had to actually ring up Bruce Ashby and say, you know, you built 2 rods.
You want one identical?
Can you do another one?
Yeah.
Which of course he did. But when I got to work, I said, Bernie, what is wrong with you? Why didn't you tell her that you've got to buy 3?
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking back then, they were still 200 quid a rod. But they were beautiful and could cast. But the reels, I had to get the old Shimano, what they call the sea spins, which are like the big pit bait run.
Right, okay, yeah.
And compared to these modern reels, they were crap as well.
Yeah.
Well engineered, but the spool wasn't very deep. But it started me off with these rods where I could now perhaps cast a lot further. Maybe at a push, getting towards 140-ish.
Yeah.
But that was when you were using thin line, and the trouble you use thin line, you got more cut-offs, and so it was a double-edged sword. But I spent a lot of time on Harefield. As I say, fell in love with the place, learned various things, learned a lot there. And again, there's stories that I can tell you about Harefield. And
well, we can touch on Harefield as a full entity, can't we?
But I think I did 8 years on there, and I was working in advertising, quite stressful. And every now and again, I'd have to go to the doctors for a check-up and this and that. And my doctor started saying to me, look, your blood pressure is really up here, and you're not eating properly, you're drinking too much, and all the things you shouldn't be doing, you're not exercising, and you know, you really need to sort of look at your life a little bit. And it had started to be a bit tedious because it was so stressful. And then one thing led to another, and work started getting a bit iffy, and Bernie Stamper used to work for me. I had to lay him off, and he rang me up and said, I've decided to try and find a lake in France and do fishing trips to France. And I went, that never worked. So I suppose the next revelation was France.
Yeah.
I'd done, as I say, my time at Harefield. I'd fished there for about 8 years. Caught at the time the biggest carp in the lake, which was a fish called Nelson at 36. And my mate Bernie, who owns Lequy now, with his mate Terry O'Brien, he used to work for me at the agency, and I'd had to let him go because work had dropped off. And he decided, in his what is now infinite wisdom, decided that carp fishing in France was going to take off, because there was a few people doing trips, but only a few, taking people out in minibuses. And he set about looking for a lake, and he rang me up after a while and said he'd found this lake, and it was on a complex of 4 lakes, and he'd got permission to basically take one off. And he said, do you fancy coming out and having a fish to see if there's anything in it, see if you can catch anything, otherwise what's the point?
Yeah.
It could have been empty, because as much as the French people were saying there's carp in there.
So he was. This was like a scouting mission, really.
Yeah. So me, Todd Burney, and Albert Romp, another Savay angler, decided we'd go out there and do like a long weekend. And it was a proper adventure. It really was a proper adventure. It was a new thing for all of us. And we set off with a lot of excitement, trepidation, I suppose, as well. Because you don't know what to expect. But we'd heard stories, of people going to France and catching some big carp, so we were really excited. And we got there, and the lake was nice, but a bit bare because it was early March, end of the British close fishing season, so around about 15th of March, I think it was. Weather was cold, horrible, and we sort of split up, and Albert went in a swim which is now known as Koi Pew. I went in No Carp Corner. Bernie was in Jurassic. These are all names now that
have gone and continued.
Have gone on. So, obviously there's no names on the swims, but they became named.
So let's just rewind slightly back. You're driving to this lake complex, and you arrive. What is your first thought?
Well, I can't really. All I thought was, it's not as big as I thought it was going to be.
Okay, yeah.
Any stories I'd read about France were these big lakes.
Yeah, the huge, the Cassians, yeah.
But these were like English lakes.
Yeah.
I think the old lake is about 10 acres ish.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, I'm sure Bernie would correct me, but ish. But it made it a little bit less daunting.
Yeah.
Because you felt that if you
could find them, you were going to catch them.
And since then I have been to some of these big oceans, and they are proper intimidating.
Yeah.
When you can't barely see the other side.
Yeah.
And you think,
you can only just make let's say a 40-foot tree.
Yeah.
Let alone somebody
you
on
just
the
think,
other side.
Why would the fish be here?
Yeah.
It's very daunting, these really big expanses of water. But this was more like fishing just a big lake in England, biggish lake.
Yeah.
And there was the same sort of features, overhanging trees and deep margins, and so it was quite sexy, even though it was winter. And as I say, we decided to sort of split up and try and cover as much of the lake to give ourselves
So you didn't really treat it as, let's say, a social, like we're in a same swim now.
No,
it was more a case of cover the whole water.
I'd like to say that we were proper anglers. And that we were going to, as I say, I was probably 70 or 80 yards away from where Albert was fishing. Yeah. And the other two were right over the other side of the lake. I actually know that it's about 500 yards if you walk from where I was fishing round to where they were fishing. It was a long way.
Yeah.
But not too far that you couldn't go and get someone if you needed pictures or.
Yeah.
Well, so, anyways, we decided that we'd get set up and then meet up in Albert Swim to have something to eat. So it was a bit of a social, but not, like we weren't all going to fish out at one spot.
Yeah.
And we sat there chops in, and everyone was fired up, you know, what we're going to catch, what we're going to catch. So technically at that point Albert was the only one fishing.
Yeah.
The rest of us hadn't got rods out. And we sat there and had a few cans of beer and had something to eat. And eventually the cold got the better of us because it was bitterly cold. And about midnight we all sort of retired to our home and got cast out. So I'd sort of worked out where I was going to cast, so you know, I wasn't too daunted about casting out in the dark. Simple baits, maize, sweet corn, luncheon meat. I don't think any of us got boilies because we knew the fish had never seen a boilie, so there didn't seem any point in taking boilies. And retired to bed. And about 1 o'clock I'm shook awake by Albert. He's going, I've caught one. Oh, what do you mean you caught one? He said, I've caught one. I said, how big? He said, it's 30 pound a day. Bloody hell. You know, it's real, like...
Yeah.
Although I was really tired because we'd driven, you know, a long way and knackered, but suddenly awake. Put the kettle on, quick. So up to his swim, make a cup of tea and I look at the fish in the retainer. Look at that. And it was only a scrape at first, probably 31 if that. I was like, wow. And he then explained that he'd had a single bleep. He was fishing with maize. He'd had a single bleep and then a few minutes later it roared out. So we sort of relived the story and had a couple of brews and I said, Albert, I'm freezing, I'm knackered, I've got to go back. So I went back to my swim but fired up. I wasn't sure if I'd get back to sleep, but I was exhausted because I think we'd driven overnight to get there early in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think I was woken up about 4ish, still pitch black, with March. We had a bleep. I was like, oh. And I laid there, still wrapped up, but my eyes were open. And I'm looking at the rod and it's like, just go. Nothing happened. There was nothing, you know, the rod's been out there 5 or 6 hours and the first bleep of that. It wasn't windy or anything like that, so I thought, well,
there's something there, yeah.
It could have been an occurrence,
yeah.
As one got away with it. And I sort of closed my eyes and then all of a sudden it just roared. I was like, of course I was up, didn't put anything on my feet, didn't even put a jumper on it, and just out of the bag.
Adrenaline takes over, you don't feel it, do you?
Muddy feet, and standing there a couple of minutes out and I'm playing this fish and I'm thinking, no, it doesn't feel like a monster.
No.
And I'm playing this fish and it's cold and goodness I got wet feet. I kept thinking, I'll start fighting in a minute,
I'm just waiting for it to wake up and then...
But it didn't. And sure enough, it wasn't a big one, it was a 17 pounder, but it was a French carp, the first French carp. We didn't know the spots, we just looked and fished where we thought we should catch them.
Yeah.
And I think we did 3 nights, I'm sure it was 3, I'm sure we did more than 2 because I don't think we would have gone all that way for 2. And we all caught. So there was a few 20s, no more 30s, but we'd caught. So of course that gave us the sort of boost that we needed. Well, A, Bernie and Todd, who were going to go into business doing this, that potentially they found something.
Yeah.
And B, you know, we can catch them. So over the next sort of month or so, we just took every opportunity to go back to France.
Is it like a Friday to Monday regular thing?
Yeah, like, in fact, if you could get Friday off work and Monday, then you could leave Thursday night and be there Friday morning, and then not have to leave until some point on Monday.
Yeah.
And it was tiring. It was, you know,
you're driving through the night.
Yeah, but it's not a million miles to the Quay from Calgary, but it's still a 4-hour drive.
Yeah.
But dead exciting. Always going there with such a buzzer. And of course now, the Quay is what it is, but we're going back, it's like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was a bit of a revelation because you suddenly thought, well, France is offering this opportunity to catch big fish without the crowds, without the hassle that you had back home.
Yeah.
And it sort of was like a revelation for me because I thought, why am I fishing home?
And like you look at today's sort of scenario, you go on the linear site and you're reading no swim, one available, and still to this day there's untouched waters in France, and
loads,
and you know you can get onto Le Quay quite easily. You can get onto other lakes quite easily.
Going back then, there was a couple of commercial places. I think Burnley might have been the first commercial run lake.
Yeah.
And obviously it's changed because now he's got all 4 lakes and they run coach trips over there, 24 anglers. And they've now, because when we went, there was no lodge, there was no facilities.
Yeah.
You know, you were roughing.
Yeah, it was a drive and survive.
Yeah, driving, proper driving.
Yeah.
You know, if you wanted food, you had to go to the town, you know, and deal.
Toilet in the woods.
Yeah, and all that. It was when you look back, it was horrible.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was exciting, and we just wanted to do more of it. But it was around about that time that, as I say, work had become quite stressful for me. My blood pressure was not good, and the doctor kept saying you need to really think about your health a bit, so otherwise one day you're going to collapse and die. And I had an opportunity to get out of the company I was at, which was a big advertising agency with some money. And I went berserk and decided to start a fishing magazine. Because I knew I could design it, I had good ideas about what I wanted to do. My competition back then was Carp World, which was the biggest, Grim Pastry or Tim Paisley's magazine, and recently started Big Carp with Rob Mailer, who I'd used to write for. I think I wrote in his first ever issue. He'd asked me to do an article about hairfield. And I went about looking at researching this magazine, and as I was doing it, little did I know that Tim Paisley was also looking to launch Carp Talk.
Okay, yeah.
Almost identically at the same time,
yeah.
Which in hindsight didn't actually do me any favours.
No.
But I was determined to do it, and sure enough, I launched a magazine which was called, my first magazine was called Carp News and Angling Techniques, because I wanted it to be a bit more than carp fishing.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly difficult. I thought it was going to be easy, but it wasn't, because you had deadlines and getting other people to write for you would let you down at the last minute. Just putting it all together every month, trying to get a magazine put together and get all these pictures and words, and I was having to write my own stuff for it, and rather than just writing one article, I was having to write all sorts of stuff, editorials and hints and tips and all the captions for photographs.
So at this stage, you're pretty much writing the majority of the words, the articles. How many other anglers did you have?
I was lucky that I knew a lot of very good carp anglers who I'd met in the Colne Valley and the Darren Valley. People like Jacko and Lockie, you know, and even people like John Baker, who's a bait guru bar none.
Yeah.
You know, and there was a lot of other anglers who were big names who would all write for me, Kevin Maddox.
Yeah. So you basically had the who's who of carp.
Oh yeah.
Writing for you almost from the offset.
Yeah, and it was great. And I had some fortunate things. Right now, at the time, Nigel Mansell was world champion.
Yeah.
And Lockie.
And for those that are watching this back, we're talking world champion racing driver.
Yeah, Formula One racing driver. World champion. Now, Lockie had met a guy who was the Williams team's official photographer.
Okay, yeah.
Who liked a bit of carp fishing.
Yeah.
And he had invited Lockie along to one of these Formula One races.
Yeah.
I don't know which one he went to first, but he was invited along to be in the pits.
Oh wow, yeah.
And he got to meet all these big names, including Nigel Mansell, world champion, who happened to have his own lake in Devon.
Wow.
bought a farm that had carp baits, and he liked a bit of carp fishing.
Yeah.
So he invited Martin down, because to him, Martin was a big name.
Yeah. It was his carping hero.
Yeah.
On the flip side of.
But the reality is, as a carp angler, you're not famous.
No.
Anyone, all these guys who think they're famous, none of us are famous. Nigel Mansell was famous.
Oh God, yeah, world renowned.
Yeah, you know. But carp anglers, you're not famous. Any fisherman, you're not really famous. You can be a legend in your own front room, but that's about it. But he got to know Nigel Mansell, and I said to Lockie one day, I said, "Do you reckon that you could get me a photograph of Nigel Mansell holding a carp, and he'd let me use it on the front cover?" And he went, "Well, I'll ask you." And sure enough, I managed to get a picture on my front cover of Nigel Mansell holding a carp.
Which of your episodes was this?
I can't remember.
Which release date, issue date?
It would have been about 1992, 93.
Okay, so, and what issue was it, you reckon?
Honestly,
are we talking now? This is taking you to the next sort of stage of your publishing, where you're starting to get noticed because of that photo.
Well, to be honest, it had no effect whatsoever.
Really?
Now, if I'd rung up Nigel Mansell's PR team and asked to have a picture of him on the front, it would have either been no, or would have cost
an
a
absolute
ridiculous
fortune.
amount.
Yeah.
But I got it for free.
Yeah.
And I really thought it was a bit of a coup that I got, this fame.
You just didn't make an ounce of difference.
It made no difference to sales.
Just goes to show, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It could be anybody on the front of that cover.
Yeah. And to be honest, in hindsight, you didn't actually need to be anyone. I could turn anyone into a famous carp angler by literally taking pictures of them. Even if they hadn't caught the fish, I could have caught the fish myself, given them to them, took pictures, wrote the article, John Smith, carp angler extraordinaire, blah blah blah, and within a year, so 12 months,
he was sponsored.
He would have been a known person, and everyone who met him would assume that he was a good carp angler.
Yeah.
Because you're in a magazine.
Yeah.
So that's all you need to be, is in the magazine.
Yeah.
And that's why I think some of these guys start to believe their own importance.
Yeah.
Self-importance, because they're in a magazine, so I must be famous. And I remember there was a girl I knew who once asked me what I did for a living. I said, I'm a bit of an angling journalist, stroke consultant, stroke this, and she quickly lost interest because
she weren't bothered.
It was fishy. It was fishy. And then I bumped into her a couple of weeks later, and she said, "You didn't tell me you were famous." I said, "No, I'm not famous. I'm just a fisher." She said, "I was in Smith's buying a magazine the other day, and you're on the front cover of a magazine." And
was that your magazine, by the way?
No, that was Total Carp.
Was it? Okay.
Which was
it was the next level. Yeah.
The next level. But her perceived image was, if she's buying Cosmopolitan that sold 1 million copies, and a carp magazine sells 15,000.
Yeah.
But to her, it's on the shelf next to each other, so I must be famous. I'm on the front cover. Reality, you're not. But I started doing this magazine, and it was hard work. It was hard work to do. It was hard work to pay bills, and it was just about breaking even. And I had one stroke of good fortune. I think it was 1994. Sony decided to sponsor the first carp fishing in the UK competition. Some guy had managed, I don't know how he did it, right? I can't remember his second name, I remember he was called Tony something, but he suddenly announced there was going to be this competition sponsored by Sony, and the first prize was going to be £10,000. And it was
decent amount of money back then.
Yeah, I mean, big money. Even now, 10,000 is still a lot of money. So, and you had to fish some qualifiers, or a qualifier, to get through to a final, which was going to be held at Horseshoe, Carp Society's day. And I said to my missus, I said, I ought to fish now. And because at the time we were struggling, I was having to do other jobs to make ends meet. She was having to work, which she wasn't happy about. When I worked
Never are they?
When I was in advertising, she didn't have to work.
Yeah.
And I said, and Martin's putting a team together and he wants me to be in it, but we've got to pay our own way because he couldn't afford to pay for all the entrants. So she said, well, what chance have you got of winning it? I said, well, I think I've got half a chance. I said, you know, I think I can catch a few. I said, I need a bit of luck, but, you know, I said, we could do with 10 grand. So she poo-hooed the whole idea, but I entered it. I think it cost me a couple £100. And the deal was with Lockie that we'd all enter, and whoever got through in the final, and it worked out in the end that there was 6 of us got through to the final.
And how many were actually fishing it? The final?
The final was 34 people.
Okay,
and Lockie managed to get 6 people through, including Lee Jackson, Paul Forward, was me, obviously Lockie. There's another kid that I only know his name was Mowgli, I don't know his full name. But we were there. And Dave Gawthorne.
Yeah.
And fishing under the solar banner. And the deal was if any of us won it, they would keep half and everyone else would get a grand. So, so it was a nice little bonus, so we all were going to try and
Yeah.
as it worked out, they did the draw in quite a nice way. Now, for anyone who doesn't know horseshoe, it's called horseshoe for a reason. It's sort of like a giant horseshoe. I look at it more as a sort of a big arrow.
It is, yeah.
You know, you've got this point in the middle that goes out, and then 2 long sides.
I don't think Arrowhead Lake would have the same ring.
No,
would
it's
it?
not. But horseshoe. And they decided that they would put 34 pegs down what's called the Whitney Bank, and 34 pegs down the Trout Bank, and no one in the middle. And then you would draw a peg from each side, and you could choose which side you wanted to fish. But you'd keep that secret, so no one knew which side or what swim you were going until the last minute. And you went up and drew 1 out of each bag, and I look at mine, and I've drawn absolute dog poo in both. Nowhere where I wanted. I was like, I can't believe this. Both sides, and now they were...
So 69 starts in the corner. Those of you that know horseshoe, you've got 70 and 69 in the corner.
Well, they just numbered it 1 to 34.
Right, okay,
but
so
one
they've done it that
started at the clubhouse end at each end and down to 34 as you went further down.
Okay.
And I had drawn like 30 and 31, almost opposite each other, but down the end no one wanted to be.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I don't want to be amongst a load of people. The Whitney Bank was the favoured bank. So I put the Whitney Bank peg back and kept the Trout Bank, hoping there'd be less people on that side. And as it happened, it proved right, because when I got to my peg, which was 30, there was no one in 31, 32, 33 or 34. So I've now effectively
So you're literally commanding almost, 3 acres of lake, really, aren't you?
Yeah. And luckily, there was also no one in 29, 28.
On the Whitney Bank?
On the Trout Bank.
Oh, okay,
so I've now got this huge area because most of the anglers went on the Whitney Bank. And I think there was only a handful of us stayed on the Trout Bank, including Jacko and Lockie.
Yeah.
And they're drawn in a more favourable area, a bit further up. You know where the plateau is in that big open water. They were in that area. I was further down in the weedy end. Now, normally, over a weekend at Horseshoe, people turn up in dribs and drabs and start spodding or marking, and the fish get moved about a bit. But on this particular day, we're going to fish 24 hours, Saturday midday to Sunday midday. All of a sudden you had 34 people who all started spodding and marking at the same time. And it freaked the fish out.
Yeah, closed them off. Just didn't want to know.
It was just a racket.
Yeah.
But luckily most of the racket was on the Whitney Bank. And I decided, in hindsight, it was a good decision, that I wasn't going to do hardly any of that. I had a quick little lead about, only half a dozen casts, just to know and confirm that it was weed in front of me. So I sat there pondering what to do, and I thought, well, I'm going to have a little wander down the margin and have a look. And sure enough, about 60 yards down the bank from where I was fishing, I found two lovely little clear spots, just right in the edge. One probably just a little underarm out, and one a little bit further. And I thought, right, I'm not going to win from these pegs, this peg I mean, but I might get third. Now, third prize was £3,000 worth of Sony digital, whatever it was. Second prize was £5 grand, and first prize £5 grand worth of TV and whatever. But the first prize was 10 large. So I thought, I'm not going to win that, because you're probably going to need to catch 4 or 5 carp. Or if I can catch one, I might fluke third.
Yeah.
But didn't really fancy the chances at all. So I literally fucking tied up 2 PVA bags of pellet, little fish meal boilie, which was a combination of squid and liver flavour, homemade, with some of Lockie's ingredients, and just little short rigs. And you couldn't leave your rod unattended, so I had to walk both rods down at the same time, just underarm them out, and then walk both back, sit down and go, right, I'm just going to leave them now. And I literally just put a couple of handfuls of pellet on top of each one. So hardly any bait, but I'm just fishing for a bite. And the match started, and no one's getting anything. The hours start ticking by. It's midnight. I think one fish had been hooked and lost by a match angler who was fishing the snags with stupidly thin line. Because he couldn't help himself. And he hooked and lost a fish. And at 1 o'clock I was just sort of lying on the bed chair, wide awake. And one of my rods, I just see the tip going, and boom, it was off. Pick the rod up, play the fish, and it's heart thumping when you're doing that. It's the first competition.
This has got to count.
Yeah,
got to count.
I'm thinking, don't fall off, and it got weeded a couple of times, and steady pressure, and pulled it up. Eventually, get it and net it. And I looked in the net and I thought, it's only a little one. I mean, £14. 4 and a few ounces. I thought, it's not big enough. Now, at that point, horseshoe, the average size was probably 17, 18 pounds.
So anybody else catching is going above you on the rankings. And there's what, 34 anglers. It's a good chance.
All good anglers. A lot of big names.
Right? And you're thinking, not even happening, is it?
But I thought, I've caught one. And I let out a cheer, and sort of rumours went round. Who's called? Someone's called. Because all those lot of people heard was me cheering. And they came round, weighed it, took pictures and everything. Wanted me to keep it until the morning so they could get proper pictures. Because the competition, they need the sponsorship and all that.
So and did they sack it?
Sacked up. Marshall sacked it up. So I then have to wind the other rod in and then rebait, walk down in the dark, and luckily I'd been sensible enough to leave a marker where I knew I then just had to swing them out, swung them both out, went back and made myself a cup of tea, and I'm sitting there. Now the first one, as I say, I saw the rod tip go, but it actually took a yard or two of line before I got out in the pit and picked it up. But now I'm sat in a chair next to the rods, thinking, I might just get another bite.
And what time's this?
This is like, so I had that bite about 1 o'clock, so it's now about 2 o'clock. And sure enough, I'm sat there, and as I'm sat there with a cup of tea in my hand, I just seen the rod tip, same rod, just start to go. And I was on it. Picked the rod up. And it picked my other line up. And fucking fell off.
Oh no.
And I was like, no! I thought, that's just cost me possibly 10,000. I thought, if I've caught 2, even if the other one's only 14 pounder.
And what's this feeling like?
I'm if you said I want to eat it, you can defend that.
Well, I speak to my business partner, and he says, "You going fishing?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Let me just wind this back. You go fishing, you catch a fish, you take a photo, you don't eat it or anything. You go and put it back. Yeah. Well, what's the point? people
So
just don't get it.
We are torturing fish for fun.
Yeah.
If you're going to eat it, you can say, I'm catching fish because I need to feed
on the
family.
table. Yeah.
That you can defend. What we do, so when it comes to the tree huggers and the snowflakes out there, who are
this
anti,
isn't going to make the cut.
right? Who are anti? No, it's true though.
It is, yeah.
Right, but who are anti-fishing, anti-hunting, anti-anything.
Yeah.
Right, most things. They actually have got something to moan about.
Yeah. Because literally that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Sticking a hook in their mouth, dragging them in, photo,
if
suffocate.
we're going to be ambassadors for the sport, we have to try and show some responsibility for fish care and health and the environment that we're in.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bit more to this than just fun.
Yeah, yeah.
We should care about the environment. We should care about what's going on. You know, and try and look after the fish as much as possible.
Yeah.
And be responsible, use responsible fishing tackle, and not pollute, throw discard litter, etc., etc. I mean, we're here in the benefit of I can't remember your name. Steve. Right, Steve's the owner, and he's let us come down and fish. He runs a fishery. It's nice, it's well kept, no litter, and it's a nice place to come fishing, which you can't say about everywhere. And he doesn't want people throwing litter around and polluting the environment. So it is everyone's responsibility to think about that.
Yeah.
Because if we get attacked by the greens, the tree huggers, and we can't defend this.
No.
So we've got to do something. But anyway, let's end it there. And we've got hours more to talk about.